Friday, the 30th of August, and welcome to Career 24. I'm your host, Wang Jianhou. The government has drawn up a budget plan worth 639 trillion won for next year, which is an increase of 5.2% from this year. We'll take a closer look at the plan in news briefing shortly. A $4.68 billion lawsuit between a U.S. private equity firm and the South Korean government is set to conclude tomorrow. We look into the case for our in-depth today. And coming up, we speak to the legendary ice hockey coach Jim Peck as he's about to lead Anyang Hara in the Asia League, which is returning for the first time in 3 years. We have all that and more in today's Career 24. The government says fiscal soundness is its mantra as it presented a budget plan for 2023, coming in at 639 trillion won. It includes spending restructuring as well as revisions in COVID-19 related expenditures. For more on this and other headlines of the day, we're joined in the studio by KBS World Radio news editor Eunice Kim. Hello, Eunice.
Hello, General.
So year over year, the budget is 5.2% higher than this year's. But Eunice, the government notes the sum is still the lowest on-year increase since 2017.
Yeah, that's right. South Korea, like much of the world, of course, saw its expansionary spending over the past couple of years, especially as it grappled with keeping the economy afloat during the early, most intense COVID-19 years. But now, Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho says the government will focus on fiscal soundness, stressing the importance of financial stability in the face of various economic crises and risks. The 639 trillion won budget plan for next year was finalized during a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, and part of the plan is to restructure expenditures worth 24 trillion won, the largest amount to date, by initiatives such as scrapping temporary COVID-19 measures, freezing civil servant wages, and also obligating officials at the minister or vice minister level to return 10% of their salaries. The restructuring is expected to result in a consolidated fiscal balance deficit of 58.2 trillion won next year, excluding Social Security funds, which is nearly half of the almost 111 trillion won deficit projected for this year, which does include the two pandemic-related supplementary budgets.
So how does COVID-19 related spending look to change then with the new leaner budget?
Yeah, the 2023 budget for infectious disease response got a 2 trillion won haircut as the country shifts its COVID-19 focus to the management of high-risk cases. It is down from the 6.9 trillion won earmarked for this year to 4.5 trillion won, with a focus on viral mutation analysis, antibody studies, and research on long-term effects of the virus. Funds for quarantine measures, including testing and treatment, as well as post-infection compensation, remains unchanged, but the budget for advanced prevention, including vaccination, has been slashed by some 2.4 trillion won to 1.1 trillion won next year. On the other hand, the Yoon Suk-yeol government plans to put 257 billion won toward 1,700 emergency facilities equipped with negative pressure beds, with another 18.7 billion won to go toward building 5 regional hospitals specializing in infectious diseases.
Okay, so that is the budget plan. We'll leave that there for now and move on to other headlines. President Yoon Suk-yeol and the new head of the main opposition Democratic Party, Lee Jae-myung, had their first phone conversation in their official capacities on Tuesday. Eunice, how did it go?
Yeah, it appears the two briefly spoke over the phone, with President Yoon's senior secretary for political affairs paying a courtesy visit to the new party chair after his election just this past Sunday. During the 3 to 4 minute conversation, DP chair Lee Jae-myung thanked President Yoon for bringing tranquility to Pyeongchang Village. That is, of course, where right-wing protesters had been staging aggressive demonstrations outside the retirement home of former President President Moon Jae-in. He also reiterated his hopes for President Yoon's success. In response, President Yoon asked for ease cooperation in drawing up economic bills that can help restore the people's livelihoods. And according to the DP spokesperson, the two did agree to meet at the earliest possible date without regard for formality and procedure to deepen their cooperation.
Let's move on and get an update on ongoing efforts by South Korean officials to change provisions of the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, a new law that would withhold tax incentives for EVs made by South Korean automakers and others. So what's the latest on this?
Yeah, so Seoul's ambassador to the U.S., Cho Tae-yong, in a press conference said Washington has agreed to hold talks to consider possible solutions to address Seoul's growing concerns over that Inflation Reduction Act that would limit tax incentives to electric vehicles built in North America. The top envoy said that the embassy has met with various officials from the Joe Biden government and Congress to underscore the unfairness of provisions in the law that discriminate against South Korean automakers, to which U.S. officials have voiced no objections, according to him, with some even reportedly saying it would be reasonable for Seoul to raise issue with this law that was just signed by President Biden earlier this month. The Seoul government will also set up a joint task force led by the Trade Minister, An Deok-gun, comprised of officials from the Finance and Foreign Ministries to facilitate active discussion on appropriate response measures. Minister An said that while resolving the issue through dialogue is the top priority, Seoul will consider dispute resolution mechanisms and potentially ally with German and Japanese automakers who are also impacted by what he called the discriminatory subsidy law.
Meanwhile, a very important court ruling by an international tribunal could come down as early as Tuesday night Korea time, and that is concerning a multi-billion-dollar damages lawsuit that U.S. private equity firm Lone Star has filed against the South Korean government. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, according to legal circles, the Washington-based International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes will deliver its ruling on Tuesday local time, which would culminate a decade-long legal battle. Lone Star had filed the investor-state dispute lawsuit back in 2012, demanding $4.68 billion in damages from the South Korean government. It contends that Seoul regulators had deliberately delayed approving its sale of its controlling stake of Korea Exchange Bank to global banking giant HSBC in 2007, which ended up falling through. The sale was made to Seoul-based Hana Financial Group in 2010. Lone Star also contends Korean tax authorities imposed unfair taxes. The Seoul government has maintained that Lone Star was treated fairly under the same standards as any domestic firm.
Yes, we'll get into the finer details of this case for our in-depth today, coming up right after this news briefing, to a different court case now, this time out of Seoul's Supreme Court. It has ruled that the state is indeed responsible for compensating victims of a 1975 decree issued by the Park Chung-hee government, which had enabled the violent crackdown of anti-government activists. Can you tell us more?
Sure. The Supreme Court on Tuesday described that 1975 decree as unconstitutional and also illegal under civil law. It ordered the Seoul High Court to retry the case, stating the state is liable to compensate victims who were detained, arrested, and punished at that time. The Park Chung-hee government, which had seized power in a military coup and sought to extend its reign, had issued the Presidential Emergency Decree number 9 in May of 1975 to prohibit anti-government activities, with violators subject to imprisonment of more than a year. And this latest Supreme Court verdict coming down today, reached in an in-bank session, does reverse a previous decision by the top court. That was issued 7 years ago on the same issue of state liability for the 71 plaintiffs, consisting of victims and their family. In 2015, it had said the decree was a political act of the state, and such exercise of power by then-president cannot be seen as illegal under civil law.
Moving on, a joint report by think tanks in Seoul and Washington says North Korea may in the future more aggressively employ its biochemical weapons of mass destruction and cyber capabilities in peacetime. So what more did this report say?
So this was a joint report issued by the Asan Institute for Policy Studies here in Seoul and the RAND Corporation. It was entitled Characterizing the Risks of North Korean Chemical and Biological Weapons, Electromagnetic Pulse, and Cyber Threats. It is a follow-up to last year's report on North Korea's nuclear weapons program. In a joint news conference Tuesday in Seoul, the think tanks warned that North Korea could more aggressively utilize other types of WMD besides nuclear warheads. They refer to this as the OWMD. This includes chemical, biological, and electromagnetic pulse weapons, anticipating that its nuclear quote-unquote shadow would discourage a strong response by South Korea and the U.S. The think tank said North Korea's use of such weapons would transform the nature of a major war on the Korean Peninsula and cause immense damage to South Korea and the U.S. military as well as the civilian population. They also issued a list of recommendations, including forming a strategic deterrence and warfighting group, and to make clear to Pyongyang that there would be a price to be paid for any and all provocations.